there are different aspects to constructing a daily Buddhist practice. And today, I'm going to try to give you some pointers on how to do that, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith. I'm Study Director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing. Tony Wesolowski had a question a while ago over on the Secular Buddhist Association's Facebook page, on which we post stuff quite frequently, so you might want to check it out. He asked about constructing a daily practice, getting some pointers on that. And there's so much to say, and everyone's going to have their own take, but here's, I can only give you my take and some ideas, some pointers that'll help you perhaps think through how you want to approach this problem. But we'll begin just by thinking that in general, the Buddhist practice can be understood following the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is probably the most famous way that we can get an idea of what a Buddhist practice is supposed to be like. And the Eightfold Path has sort of three different parts to it. There's the ethical part, there's the wisdom part, and then there's the meditation part. And all three of those really should be part of a daily practice. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the ethical part today, but that's not because it's not important. In fact, what I should say is that it's something in the background of everything that we do. And part of, I think, constructing a daily practice, a Buddhist practice, really a spiritual practice or a philosophical practice of any kind, is going to be in large part ethical. So we want to live in a way that is good for people around us and good for ourselves. We want to be kind to people. We want to be compassionate, both to them and to ourselves. We want to be compassionate and kind to the world. And so we want to behave in ways that are ethical, that don't hurt people, that don't involve telling lies, that don't involve all the things that are important within any ethical system, but certainly within a Buddhist one as well. So that certainly is going to be a significant part of our daily practice. But it's the sort of thing we probably won't have in mind for the most part. And we won't think of it as formal meditation or formal practice, because what the formal practice really is in Buddhism is meditation. So really a large part of what we think of when we come to think of a daily Buddhist practice is going to be some form of daily meditation. And the most important part about doing meditation, I think, is indeed finding a time to do it every day. I think everyone's going to have their own preferences on how to do that and their own lives as to what they can manage to do. But for myself, I find it best to do meditation early in the morning because in that way it sort of perfumes the rest of the day. I also find it useful in my own life to do meditation after having exercised. So if you're going to go to the gym, if you're going to go out for a run, it's best, I think, to do meditation after that, because that having done the exercise will wake you up to an extent, and so as a result, the energy that you derive from that will then oftentimes extend into your meditation and keep you more alert and awake. Whereas if you simply, roll out of bed, get dressed, and do meditation, oftentimes you're going to find yourself somewhat sleepy. But everyone's different, so this is a suggestion for you from my own experience. And that said, of course, any time that you can do meditation is better than nothing. So if it's best for you, it's most convenient for you to do meditation before going to bed, do it that way. And as far as the time goes, as much time as you can afford to give to it. I myself often do a half an hour meditation every day. If I can manage that, if I can't, I'll do less. If you can manage it, 45 minutes is wonderful too. Half an hour may seem quite a bit for some of you, in which case, do whatever you feel you can do and push it a little bit. If you have the time to do, let's say, 15 minutes, but don't feel comfortable with that, try 10 minutes. And then once you're comfortable with that, push a little bit farther. Myself, I sort of dove into the deep end and started doing half-hour meditations pretty much immediately. And I found that although it was a little difficult at the beginning, I sort of got into the feel of it pretty quickly. So I don't think that's really a problem so long as you have the time. Now the question then arises, what kind of meditation? Because there are so many different kinds of Buddhist meditation. The most famous, the most well-known is mindfulness meditation, one that is constructed around mindfulness of breathing. So where we follow our breaths, follow the in-breath, follow the out-breath. We become aware of the changing nature of reality, of the way we experience things. Anything that we experience comes and goes. We become aware of the fact that we're not in control of our mind most of the time. We become aware of the thoughts that arise and pass. We can become aware of the character of the mind, of whether we are angry or whether we're happy or whether we're tired or whether we're awake and with energy. All of these things are things that we can become aware of by doing mindfulness of breathing. And so that is probably the one that I would recommend most of all. It's the one that is sort of, as it were, the umbrella over all kinds of Buddhist meditation. And that's not to denigrate from any of the other ones, and mindfulness itself will require us to do some calming meditation. These are, in the Eightfold Path, two separate path factors, that is mindfulness and calming meditation. They're separate, but in fact they go together, because in order to do mindfulness meditation properly, we have to get ourselves into a calm frame of mind. So that's what we do when we start doing mindfulness of breathing. We calm ourselves down, pay attention to the way the world is around us, or the way that our mind is around us. Now, I would also recommend, if you're going to put that kind of meditation into your daily routine, to consider adding a bit of metta or what's known as a loving kindness practice as well. And you can just do that while you're doing meditation. In other words, you may decide to sit for, let's say, half an hour. And you may not really know what time it is while you're sitting there on the cushion or wherever you are, on your chair or lying down. But I think after a time you'll get some general idea as to whether, a significant number of minutes have passed, you've calmed down, you've been doing mindfulness meditation for a little while, so you feel sort of calm and at ease with that. And at some point, just turn your mind to a little bit of metta or loving kindness practice. That, I think, will also help perfume the rest of your day, perfume the rest of your practice. If you do metta for a while and you sort of feel like you've done it enough, then go back to mindfulness, whatever. I think each of us will find our own sort of peace with that. But metta or loving kindness practice is so useful to, I think, our interpersonal relations once we get out in the world, once we get off the cushion, out of our formal meditation and into the world. It really does help us to react better to people. It doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get angry during the day. You will. Getting angry is just part of life for all of us who are, let's say, not yet awakened. But it would at least, I think, help if you do this over a long period of time in a regular basis. It will at least make, when anger arises, it will arise with less strength. And when it arises with less strength, it will stay for less time. It'll be something that you'll find you can get more of a handle on if you do this regularly over a long period. There's no magic bullet here. It's not a quick kind of thing that you can expect to get anything out of in a day or a week. But again, this is supposed to be a daily practice that you're doing over a long period of time. Now, Tony also asks about another aspect of a potential daily practice, which are affirmations that we might say to ourselves. And those indeed can be very useful and appropriate. Some examples of those would involve the three refuges. The three refuges are very, very famous in Buddhism. I've done a video about that. We take refuge in, let's say, we can say to ourselves, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. That is one thing we can say to ourselves as sort of an affirmation. And of course, each of us is going to have our own take on what that really means. A secular person will have a slightly different take, let's say, than a traditional believer. But there are ways of incorporating that kind of approach into both a secular and a traditional kind of practice. We can also take the Buddha's suggestion that we do 2 refuges, that we take 2 refuges. The Buddha actually recommended 2 refuges at the end of his life, and at other times as well during his teaching. That is, to take refuge in yourself and to take refuge in the Dharma. Taking refuge in yourself, in this context, really is going to mean something like taking control of your own practice. In other words, understanding that the point of all of this is to purify your mind stream, to make your mind more pure in a sort of an ethical sense, so that you're going to be more skillful in the way that you react in the world. And so it's essentially, all of these are sort of setting yourself a good intention for the day. And so one way of doing that, again, is with 2 refuges or 3 refuges. Another option that some people do, I know, is to affirm the 5 precepts, which are the ethical norms in Buddhism, so that you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't lie, you don't commit sexual misconduct, and you don't take intoxicants or become intoxicated. Those are the 5 precepts, and of course, you can say them any way you like. There's a sort of a traditional formula for them, which some people like to recite, or even recite the Pali if they're really into it. That's another option. Everyone is going to want to do different things, or will find certain things useful. The Buddha also talks about 5 daily reflections. There's actually 5 reflections that the Buddha specifically recommended us to look at every day. I did an earlier video on that, which I'll put up here. It's a little bit too much to go into all 5 of them, but basically they're looking at the fact that all things are change, and all things are unsatisfactory in some deep sense. And so even the most dear things to us will eventually be lost to us. And that is a daily reflection that can be very difficult for some of us. And so I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for everybody, at least not all the time. For some people that might be too difficult. It might be too difficult to start there, but I think that's at least where we want to be aiming ourselves, to understand where we are on this path of coming to terms with change. And that's part of the wisdom part of the Eightfold Path, is coming to terms with the facts of change. The great Thai Buddhist monk, Ajahn Chah, used to give us a reflection about change this way. He would say, he would hold up a mug, and he would say, "This mug is already broken." And that wasn't to say that it was actually already broken. It would be a perfectly good mug. But the point is, think of it that way, because inevitably this mug will eventually be broken. Somebody will drop it. It'll fall off somewhere. Somebody will knock it off, or eventually be thrown into the trash, and it'll be broken in the trash. At some time it will be broken. And if we come to each of our quote-unquote possessions, everything in the world that we claim to own, we will, with that kind of mindset, if we come to them with that kind of mindset that these things are impermanent, they are not going to last forever, eventually they will be thrown out in one way or another. Eventually they will be the sort of things that we will get rid of, or that after we die will be gotten rid of in our stead and go on to somebody else's ownership, or go to the garbage or whatever. If we come to all of our possessions with that kind of mindset, it can, again, perfume the mind and make us think, I think, in wiser ways about how we approach ownership in general, and how we approach the objects around us. But with all these reflections, I would suggest mixing things up a bit. Don't make them become too rote for you. If you say the same reflection over and over through weeks and months and even years, eventually it just becomes a form of words. And the point of a reflection, or all these reflections, is really to reflect upon them. And I think the only way to do that consistently and constantly is to, again, switch them around and try to find different ways in front of yourself to reflect that day. It might be part of your practice to come up with a new reflection every once in a while that you think is productive of wisdom and is productive of ethical conduct, in the case of, let's say, the reflection on the 5 precepts, or that is part of a meditative reflection, such as metta or loving kindness or compassion or sympathetic joy. These are all reflections that we can go to from time to time, so that we don't become blind to them because of the repetition. Now, Tony also asked, as part of a daily routine of practice, about reading suttas, about any suttas that I would recommend for kind of daily practice. And in the Buddhist tradition, there are so many good suttas, and so many good suttas that are unknown really to virtually everybody. The number of suttas is in the thousands. So there's a huge amount of material there, and it is wonderful. On the other hand, there are certain things we have to keep in mind. If we read suttas from a modern mindset, we'll find them oftentimes a little bit difficult, because to begin with, there's a lot of repetition involved. These were memorized for centuries before they were written down. So, like any sort of memorized tradition, there's a certain amount of repetition involved in them. You'll find similar kinds of ideas repeated over and over in different parts of the sutta material. There's also a lot of words there that have a technical meaning within the tradition that you'll have to find ways of reading through or understanding, because the word on the page oftentimes doesn't quite get at the depth of the concept involved, because again, these are technical terms sometimes. It can help to have somebody who is fluent in them, familiar with them, to at least give you an introduction. There's a wonderful book by Bhikkhu Bodhi, which I recommended in the past, which is basically a compilation of selected suttas from the tradition that get into all kinds of different issues there. So the book itself is a good introduction. I'll put an image of it up here on the screen somewhere. I don't have a copy of the book with me right now. Now that's something that you could potentially buy and just delve into from time to time. There also are websites such as Sutta Central and Access to Insight that have suttas translated online for you that you can go through. And an option would be simply to take one at random, or more or less at random. Just pick around and just pick one and read it and see what it means to you. That is going to have its pitfalls, of course, because you're not going to understand everything if you go into it at random, unless you've had a good background introduction to it. Nevertheless, that's a place to start. My own videos, of course, I talk about suttas all the time. And I try always to link the suttas down below in the information box so that you can get links to them if you want to read the actual sutta. That's another option for you. I would also encourage you not to only look at information from early Buddhism, although I really do think that it's some of the best and wisest material in any tradition. But there's, for example, a lot of wonderful material in a very, very similar vein that could really be collated side by side with the Buddhist material. There's a lot of great information in let's say, classical Greek philosophy from, let's say, the Stoics or the Epicureans or other related schools, from Socrates himself. Very wise teachings about very similar kinds of ideas. And so if you have the option, I'd say take it, buy a book of early Stoic teachings. There's a lot of wonderful material there. And read that as well from time to time. Delve into that from time to time. And you'll find kind of similar teachings for the most part. Now, having said that, I imagine that many of you have something of a daily practice. And so I'd be interested to know what you would recommend. I'm just giving some ideas from my own background, but I myself would be thrilled, delighted to learn of new and interesting ways of mixing up my own daily practice. And all of us, I think, are in the same boat as far as that goes. So if any of you have any things to suggest, put them down below in the questions and comments. I think the most important thing is to have a daily practice, to have something that we can come back to have some way of bringing ourselves back to wisdom, to, touching bottom from time to time so that we aren't always floating up, as it were, in the clouds and getting pulled this way and that by the worldly winds of pleasure and pain, of praise and blame, of all of these different parts of the world that are so apparently desirable, but which, when we look at them clearly and with a wise mind, turn out to be largely illusory. And by having a daily practice, by touching bottom from time to time, we can become aware of that more directly, and as a result, escape some of these bonds that the normal world around us likes to throw on us from time to time. If you're finding this material useful to you, check out my Patreon page if you would like to help support the channel. Please give it a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe if you're new and haven't subscribed yet. And I do hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. So meanwhile, be well.